Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian London, to a time when people believed that ghosts lingered in wallpaper patterns, and that a slice of well-aged Stilton might be your best defense against the undead. Yes, really? You might not survive the night, if you're lactose intolerant. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave me a comment with your city and what time it is as you're listening. I love knowing where you're tuning in from, especially if your house isn't haunted yet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's nearly midnight, and you're walking alone down the cobbled streets of Soho, London. Your footsteps echo in that damp, whispery way London streets do when it's late enough that even the pubs have gone quiet. The air smells like a strange blend of gaslight, horse sweat, chimney smoke, and, oddly, fresh bread. Someone must still be baking nearby. A part of you wonders if it's a spiritual bakery. Everything else around here seems to be. But you're not here for the bread. You're here for the cheese. You're holding a small woven basket lined with wax paper and slightly fraying ribbons. Inside lies a neatly wrapped wedge of aged cheddar, nestled like some sacred offering. You glance again at the slightly stained letter in your pocket, written in a spidery but enthusiastic hand. The paper smells faintly of cloves and ink, with a thumbprint in what might be jam. Don't come too early. Spirits don't bother showing up before 9. Featherstone. You're not entirely sure why you said yes to this gig. You came to London to write essays. Quiet, boring essays on early romantic poets and the politics of cloud watching. You imagined long days in libraries, cups of lukewarm tea, a kind of scholarly suffering. Not whatever this is. But then again, the essays haven't sold, the tea is too expensive, and your landlord is the kind of man who measures rent in hours, not months. So when this Featherstone character offered £0.50 per night, plus dinner leftovers, to assist with observations of posthumous activity in semi-public urban spaces, you said yes. Especially once he clarified that most of the job involved carrying notebooks, placing cheese on things, and not asking too many questions. Your destination, number 47 on Windmere Lane, is a tall, grey brick townhouse, the kind that looks like it's either haunted or slightly offended. The windows are mostly shuttered, save one on the second floor that flickers faintly with candlelight. The brick is soot-stained and the door knocker is shaped like a lion trying to sneeze. You knock twice, then once more just to be polite. The door creaks open on its own. Of course it does. You hesitate. The hallway inside looks dim, layered in shadows and the faint glimmer of something reflective. The walls are crowded with coats, umbrellas, and mysterious lumps covered by tarps. You step inside. The floorboards protest in long, musical groans. Your boot lands on an old newspaper. You glance down and read. Green orbs seen over Regent Street at midnight. The date is last week. Okay, recent hauntings. Good to know. To your right, a rack of umbrellas leans drunkenly against the wall, each handle tagged with a scrap of paper. Northern Scotland, rotting smell detected. Suspiciously cold handle. Suspected spectral origin, confirmed by cat. You're just about to call out when a voice floats from upstairs. Did you bring the cheese? You pause. Then nod automatically, forgetting he can't see you. Perfect. Tonight, we're testing the new moon and aged cheddar combination. You begin climbing the stairs. They are narrow, soft in the middle, and smell like camphor and something else, possibly soup. At the landing, a small oil lamp flickers on a pedestal made of stacked encyclopedias. Then he appears. Medium height. Hair like a recently plucked dandelion puff. Barefoot. Dressed in what appears to be a patchwork dressing gown stitched from old astronomy club uniforms. In one hand he holds a long stick of chalk, in the other, a brass telescope aimed at a lamppost through the open window. Place the cheddar on the windowsill. Dead center. Don't let it lean. You oblige. The cheese sits silently in the moonlight, looking unusually dignified. He makes a few adjustments to the telescope, mutters something that may or may not be Latin, then scratches in a small notebook with a pencil that has clearly been chewed by both man and mouse. You clear your throat. Why cheese? He turns to look at you like you've just asked him the secret of time. Because, he says with a raised finger, it's London's most stable nighttime scent. No other food holds its aromatic profile past 11 p.m. like mature cheddar. It's dependable. You blink. And, he adds, lowering his voice, it doesn't interfere with the magnetometer. You try to digest this as he continues. Also, certain spirits, particularly the petty, stubborn types, are said to detest fermented food. Or maybe they're just lactose intolerant in the afterlife. The literature is fuzzy. He resumes scribbling. 11:27 p.m. Streetlight flickers. Cheddar surface, slightly moist. Ambient aura, inconclusive. You jot that down too. It seems like the kind of thing you'd regret forgetting. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse squeaks. Possibly in agreement. Possibly in protest. Over the next hour, he shares what can only be described as a cheese-based cosmology of ghost interaction. Humidity enhances aromatic resonance. Only blue cheese guides unrestful spirits toward the exit. Sharp cheddar cuts through psychic residue like vinegar on grease. Spirits hate hot milk but not cold cheese. That last one he says twice in case you didn't catch it the first time. You ask if that's proven. Historians still argue about it, he says very seriously. There's one at Oxford who swears by heated dairy. Absolute nonsense. He pours you a cup of something that tastes like old mint tea and old optimism. You drink it anyway. Swarm. Outside, the lamppost flickers once, then settles. A breeze passes through the room. The cheddar does not react. You think of your life before this, quiet lectures, dusty books. You feel, for reasons you don't quite understand, more awake now than you have in weeks. As you begin to gather your things, he smiles at you. It's the first time he looks directly at you with something like fondness. You did well tonight, he says. Didn't drop the cheddar. Wrote things down. That's really the essence of ghost work, you know. Observe, don't interfere. He rummages in a stack of maps and hands you a bundle tied with string. The paper is soft and slightly burned around the edges. Study these. I've marked every known haunted cheese shop in Greater London. You glance at the top map. A note is scrawled in red ink. Enter with caution. Camembert apparition remains active. You raise an eyebrow. They say it sighs at closing time, he murmurs. You thank him, not entirely sarcastically. He waves you off, already lost in another notebook, possibly preparing the brief for tomorrow. Back on the street, the fog has thickened. You wrap your coat tighter. Somewhere behind you, a cat yowls, and a bell rings from a shop that definitely isn't open. You look down at the map again. Your flat is 2 blocks from a location marked strong Limburger residue. You consider walking the long way home. But somehow, oddly, you feel safer. Like maybe cheese really is a kind of protection. You decide to arrive early tomorrow. You wake up to the sound of a horse coughing outside your window. Or maybe it's the driver. In Victorian London, it's honestly hard to tell. The morning is not so much a sunrise as it is a grayish blur slowly soaking through the curtains. You blink at the ceiling, stiff-necked from a mattress stuffed with questionable straw and a pillow that seems to have given up. There's a damp chill in the air, the kind that makes you wonder if your socks got wet in your sleep. And then you smell it, coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and a faint trace of something pretending to be tea. Welcome to another glorious Victorian morning. You sit up, stretch, and eye the cheese map Mr. Featherstone gave you last night. It's half hanging out of your coat pocket, slightly crumpled, and now sporting a small tear where you must have rolled over it. The map smells faintly of Gouda. You're not sure if that's by design or just contamination. The map is dense with scribbles. Notes like spiritual hotspot since 1812, cheddar-related disturbances confirmed, and avoid on Tuesdays, no reason given. One corner is marked simply with a frown and a question mark. You begin to suspect that Mr. Featherstone was not joking. Still half asleep, you shuffle to your basin, splash your face with freezing water, and chew a dry biscuit as you shrug into your overcoat. The biscuit tastes like plaster and guilt. The overcoat smells like London, soot, sweat, and survival. You head out, crunching your way down the familiar cobbles. It's still early evening, the kind of twilight where every shadow looks like it might whisper something rude. The street vendors are louder than usual. Someone is selling oysters that look like they're already halfway to being ghosts themselves. You arrive at Featherstone's house. He opens the door like he's been waiting behind it all day, hands poised for dramatic flair. "Welcome back, apprentice," he beams. "Ready to confront the dairy-hating undead once more?" You nod slowly. Maybe you're ready. Maybe you're just too polite to say no to a man wearing socks embroidered with tiny constellations. Orion seems to be tap dancing across his ankle. Tonight's assignment? You're documenting a new case involving a highly annoyed poltergeist and a wheel of double Gloucester. You're not sure how exactly cheese and ghosts interact at that level of aggression, but you suppose you'll find out. But before the seance, or cheese arrangement, or whatever tonight's event technically qualifies as, Featherstone insists on something different: context. Can't investigate hauntings if you don't understand why everyone's seeing ghosts to begin with, he says, guiding you through the entryway. You pass the umbrella rack again. Someone's added a note to one. Handle buzzed when insulted. He pulls you into the study. If you thought it looked chaotic last night, it now resembles a very enthusiastic cheese-themed crime scene. There are books stacked in precarious towers, jars of grayish powders labeled things like ground marsh fog and Oxfordshire lint, and a fresh wedge of brie glistening on a silver tray like it's waiting to be crowned prom queen. In the center of the room is a chalkboard that reads in bold looping script: Victorian misconceptions. Why we believe everything is haunted. Featherstone claps his hands. So, why is this era so ghost-happy? You blink. You were hoping for tea. Let's start with the basics, he says, now pacing in front of the chalkboard like a professor with too many side quests. You sit. The chair creaks but holds. He begins his crash course on the psychology and sociology of Victorian ghost fever. And honestly, it makes sense in a weird, soot-covered way. The 19th century, it turns out, is a perfect breeding ground for hauntings. The Industrial Revolution was roaring, literally, through every city, replacing silence with machines and solitude with crowded factory tenements. People were dying in new and exciting ways. Chimney sweeps, gas explosions, textile accidents, you name it, someone probably died from it. And then there was urbanization. Tens of thousands of people packed into neighborhoods designed for hundreds. You barely knew your neighbors, and every creak above your flat could be a ghost or a drunk baker. Either way, unsettling. Add to that the sky-high child mortality rate, plus Queen Victoria's publicly mourned loss of Prince Albert, and you've got a society fully immersed in grief and spiritual uncertainty. Death was everywhere, and people were desperate to find meaning, or at least closure. Or at the very least, someone to blame for the missing teaspoons. People needed control, Featherstone explains, pulling down a dusty volume and letting it fall open. And cheese is controllable. It's consistent. You don't have to believe in it. It just exists. And it ages on schedule. Unlike Uncle Reggie. You write that down, unsure whether Uncle Reggie is real or theoretical. He continues, gesturing to a diagram labeled mold growth versus ectoplasmic dissolution. See, dairy comes from life. Milk, cows, sunshine. It has structure. It has chemistry. That's comforting. To some people, it seemed logical that something rooted in biology might disrupt or repel something not. You glance at the chalkboard, where he's drawn a ghost being slapped with a slice of Swiss. There were real beliefs, he says, that strong-smelling cheeses, especially those with aging molds, could interfere with ectoplasmic cohesion. The logic was that spirits, made of unstable energy, would get confused or deluded when confronted with the equally chaotic microbial activity of blue cheese. It's like shouting nonsense into a nonsense tunnel, he says, satisfied. Another theory, once published in a now-defunct fringe medical journal, proposed that certain dairy molds act like spiritual antibiotics, neutralizing ghostly presences the way penicillin handles bacteria. It's nonsense mostly, he admits, but beautifully consistent nonsense. You raise an eyebrow. People really believe that? Some still do, he replies, not quite making eye contact. You look around the room again. It's a blend of old superstition and obsessive cataloging. Bells with intricate carvings, salt jars shaped like sleeping cats, stacks of neatly labeled spoons, each with a note, whispered once, and an untouched lemon tart sitting on the windowsill like it's waiting for a ghost to come back for dessert. You wonder how many of these items are actually tools, and how many are just ambience. But then again, isn't that the whole point? Ghost hunting, it turns out, isn't just about believing in spirits. It's about giving shape to fear, naming the shadows, and placing a slice of cheddar between you and whatever might be lurking in the corner of the room. Outside, a carriage clatters past. The shadows on the wall wobble. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughs. You shiver slightly, not from cold, but from a strange sense of recognition. Like maybe, just maybe, you've heard that laugh before. Everything in this house, Featherstone says softly, has a purpose. Even if that purpose is to confuse a ghost. You glance at the brie. It's begun to sweat slightly, forming a shiny, noble dome. You're not sure if that's normal or part of the experiment. You take one last look at your notes for the night. Your handwriting is worse than usual. Some of it's smeared. But you manage to scratch down one final sentence. People fear what they can't understand. So they feta cheese. You underline it. Twice. Featherstone sees this and nods with approval, as if you've just unlocked level 2. Good instincts, he murmurs. Tomorrow we deal with a ghost that hates dairy, but loves custard. You don't know whether to laugh or bring your own spoon. The third night begins with a drizzle that doesn't so much fall as hover, like the air can't quite commit to being wet. The sky is a washed-out gray, a color that looks tired of its own existence. As you walk, each footstep sinks into puddles with a reluctant squish, and your left sock has already given up on the idea of staying dry. You try to dodge the worst of it, hopping from one uneven cobblestone to the next like some soggy Victorian street ballerina. But it's hopeless. By the time you reach Featherstone's townhouse, your coat is clinging to your shoulders, your shoes smell like ancient dishwater, and your fingers are too numb to knock with dignity. Fortunately, you don't have to. Featherstone opens the door with the enthusiasm of someone revealing a surprise birthday cake. Except instead of a cake, he's holding a wax paper-wrapped block of red Leicester, like it's an invitation or a weapon. Tonight, he declares, eyes gleaming, you'll meet the others. You blink. Others? He doesn't answer, just ushers you in with a theatrical sweep of his cheese-bearing hand. The parlor, usually dim and pleasantly dusty, has been transformed. A fire crackles in the grate, casting warm, twitchy shadows across the wallpaper. Candles are lit in sconces along the wall, and the air smells faintly of lavender, wood smoke, and something else. Cheese, obviously, but also cloves? 3 figures are already gathered around the low tea table, seated in mismatched armchairs like characters in a Gothic play no one quite understands. You try not to stare, but it's impossible not to take them in. The first is tall, with a velvet burgundy coat covered in. Are those pockets? Yes, 12 by your count. Each one has a different item poking out. A compass, a brass whistle, what might be a vial of glitter, and something that looks suspiciously like a spoon glued to a pine cone. The second is wearing a school uniform, complete with knee socks, a blazer, and a striped tie. He appears to be at least 40. His expression is deadly serious, as if he's permanently stuck in the middle of a final exam. And the third, well, the third is mostly hat. A wide-brimmed affair with layers of lace, velvet, and perhaps a small taxidermied bird tucked into the side. You're not sure if it's fashionable, defensive, or aerodynamic. Featherstone claps his hands. Friends, meet our newest apprentice. Apprentice, meet the Society of Paranormal Domestic Affairs. He pauses dramatically. SPDA for short. You nod, trying to appear professional while dripping gently onto the rug. We've been operating unofficially since 1867, he adds. You want to ask what unofficially entails? Was there a rejected license application involved? A secret oath? A disagreement over spectral bylaws? But instead someone hands you a mug. It smells like boiled nettles and a hint of hope. You sit. The meeting begins with a toast. Velvet Pocket Man stands, raises his glass and intones. To spirits, both seen and stored in bottles. Everyone drinks. You sip yours. Tastes like earthy soup. Then the real business begins. Reports are delivered with great solemnity. A bakery in Bloomsbury has been experiencing persistent tapping sounds from beneath the floorboards. Someone suspects it's either a ghost or a very organized rat. A cold spot has been recorded near the West India docks, though no one agrees on whether it's ghost-related or simply the result of poor insulation. And most urgently, the haunted broom cupboard at the Covent Garden Opera House. I'm telling you, says Hat Lady, I felt the presence directly. 3 times I entered that cupboard, and 3 times the mop whispered in Latin. No one laughs. At least not until she adds. Also, someone stole my biscuit while I was inside. You try to look neutral. Everyone here believes what they're saying. And oddly, you kind of do too. Throughout the entire conversation, cheese is a recurring theme. Velvet Pocket Man proposes leaving aged Gruyere under the Opera House stairwell to neutralize acoustic vibrations of residual hauntings. School uniform guy insists on suspending goat cheese in muslin from the chandeliers for aerial clarity. And Hat Lady, utterly sincere, claims no ghost has ever survived a midnight exposure to Wensleydale. You take notes. Is the cheese symbolic? You whisper to Featherstone. He shakes his head. Cheese is cheese. You try not to laugh. But there's something oddly comforting about how confidently everyone speaks. Their conviction is like a well-worn armchair, soft, maybe outdated, but deeply reliable. You start to get it. Maybe it doesn't matter whether cheese works. Maybe it's the ritual that matters. The routine. The belief that somewhere between the crumbs and the candlelight, someone is trying their best to make sense of the weirdness. Featherstone seems to read your thoughts. He leans in. Ghost hunting isn't always about what's real, he says. It's about patterns. Familiar steps. Tidy explanations. You do the ritual, you take notes, you place the cheddar on the sill. The ghost might leave. Or not. But you did your part. He gestures to a shelf nearby. You hadn't noticed it before, tucked behind the armchair with a slightly haunted-looking cushion. It's a cheese archive, meticulously labeled. You lean closer. Each wedge is sealed in wax paper, marked with handwritten notes. Camembert, ineffective, attracts cats. Pecorino Romano, promising, sharp energy. Double Gloucester, reliable. Causes only mild haunting. Brie, not recommended unless you enjoy chaos. Wensleydale, Hat Lady's choice. Results unverified. You raise an eyebrow. So, is this scientific? Featherstone tilts his head. Well, the academic world still debates what counts as evidence. But if cheese helps people feel safer in their haunted parlors, does it matter? You consider that. Honestly, it's not the worst logic you've heard this week. The meeting wraps with a demonstration. Hat Lady pulls out what looks like a divining rod, but it's actually 2 old cheese knives, handles bound with red thread. She holds one in each hand and begins slowly circling the room. The knives wobble slightly, then cross, right by the fireplace. Everyone stares. Someone whispers, typical. You glance at Featherstone. What's behind there? He shrugs. Usually, mice. laughter ripples through the room. It's light, warm, unforced. You realize you've been smiling without noticing. And just like that, the evening stops feeling like ghost hunting. Feels like a club. A support group for people who don't quite fit into the world but have found comfort in rituals involving cheese and candlelight. People who believe that kindness counts, that curiosity matters, and that maybe, just maybe, the dead aren't the only ones looking for peace. As you prepare to leave, Velvet Pocket Man hands you a small wrapped parcel. Inside, a modest slice of Lancashire cheese and a folded note that reads, "In case of emotional haunting. Best enjoyed with crackers and tea." You don't know how to respond, so you simply nod. You tuck it into your coat, close to your chest. You walk home slower than usual, though the rain has stopped. The puddles reflect the gaslights like pools of gold, and for a moment, London doesn't seem so gray. You're not sure if you've become a believer yet. But you do believe in this. A shared joke, a ritual, a warm drink, and the small strange joy of feeling like you belong. Maybe it's a little about ghosts. Maybe it's a little about cheese. But mostly it's about community. Tonight's experiment is simple, Featherstone says. We test whether ghosts prefer hard or soft cheese. You stare at him for a second, trying to detect sarcasm. But no. His face is utterly sincere, as though this is the kind of question that stumped philosophers for centuries. You nod slowly. Because honestly, at this point you've stopped trying to guess what's a joke. The sky outside is the color of bruised parchment, and a cold breeze is slipping under every doorframe in London. The street lamps flicker like they're undecided about reality. You've started timing your walk to Featherstone's townhouse so you don't have to stand on his porch too long. It always feels like something is watching from the windows above, though you've never seen anyone but Featherstone on the upper floors. Tonight you're back in the study, that glorious organized chaos of scrolls, clocks, maps, melted candle stubs, and at least 3 items that may have once been part of a goat. In the center of the room is a perfectly symmetrical cheese platter, looking oddly ceremonial. You count 4 types, arranged from mildest to most offensive. A modest wedge of cheddar, stern and crumbly. A dollop of brie, practically sighing at the edges. A crumbly chunk of Stilton, regal and a bit smug. And finally, a cheese you only recognize by the smell, Epois's, which manages to smell like a damp sock that just got a library degree. Beside it sits Featherstone's newest invention, an unstable-looking contraption made from copper wires, a teacup, a shard of mirror, and a half-burnt candle stuck into what appears to be an old muffin tin. He's balancing the mirror so delicately that even blinking at it feels like a threat. "Behold," he says, with the flourish of a magician revealing his final card. "The ectoplasmic triangulator." You stare. Something. Mostly it's just reflecting your very skeptical expression back at you. So far, the triangulator has not triangulated anything, unless you count your growing confusion. Featherstone, undeterred, adjusts a copper wire. "This device should respond to cheese-induced spectral disruptions," he explains. You open your notebook and start a new page, titling it, "Cheese-based Ghost Preferences, a Working Theory." Still you're curious, why cheese? Why not garlic or incense or something less perishable? You ask him. Featherstone grins and immediately pulls a thick book off the shelf, hand-bound in cracked green leather. The Dairy Witch's Handbook, a practical guide to edible energies. Of course it's real. He opens it reverently, flipping past diagrams of cheese wheels inscribed with runes and aged brie arranged on altars. Finally, he points to a sepia drawing of a Victorian parlor. In the image, little wedges of cheese sit under the windowsill, on top of the piano, and, most curiously, balanced on the corner of a picture frame. "See," he says, tapping the image. "Cheese placement was part of spiritual hygiene. Like brushing your teeth but for ghosts." You blink. Did people actually do this? Oh, absolutely. There's a journal entry from 1871. Lady Margaret Duncombe Smythe claimed that goat cheese calmed the poltergeist in her breakfast room. Said it muffled the furniture noises. Very handy during Sunday brunch. You jot it down. Not because you believe it, but because one day at some future cocktail party, you plan to casually mention it and enjoy the moment someone nods in solemn agreement without having a clue what you're talking about. Featherstone sets the book down and lights the candle. It flickers unevenly. The mirror catches the light and bounces it around the room like a polite ghost doing party tricks. He grows more serious now, voice quieter. The Victorians, he says, were obsessed with classification. Flowers, furniture styles, moral values, dog breeds, diseases, and, of course, ghosts. It makes sense the more he explains it. You live in an age where you can Google why your plant is dying and get 17 contradictory answers. But back then, death was everywhere, science was racing ahead of belief, and certainty was a luxury. So they tried to pin mystery down with labels and diagrams. Even cheese got caught in that web. Soft cheeses, Featherstone tells you, were linked to gentler hauntings. The kind of spirits who move teacups just slightly to the left, or whisper old lullabies through keyholes. Grandmothers mostly. Hard cheeses? That was for the rougher crowd, grumbling chimney sweep ghosts, or the angry tax collector who was rumored to haunt his own unpaid ledger. You're about to ask whether cream cheese ever made an appearance in spirit classification when Featherstone takes on a low, solemn tone. He raises his hand and intones. You are invited to this place of peace, by scent, by memory, by mold. You nearly choke on your own breath trying to hold back a laugh. The room goes still. The candle flame stands tall. The mirror doesn't shiver. The air remains unchanged. The only sign of anything ghostly is the brie, which has slumped sideways like it lost the will to haunt. You both stare at it. It sighs its last breath in a gooey slide. Well, Featherstone says, maybe they prefer something sharper tonight. He lifts the brie with tongs, replaces it with a defiant wedge of red Windsor, and makes a note in his logbook. Brie collapse observed at 9:47 p.m. Red Windsor deployed. Ambient temp, cool. Cheese sweated, air did not. You glance sideways. Do you ever actually see ghosts? He taps the side of his pen against his chin. Rarely. But that doesn't mean they're not there. Some things don't show up when you're looking directly. You have to catch them out of the corner of your appetite. You blink. Don't you mean I? He winks. Not always. He leans back and begins recounting cases from earlier in his career. You listen, notebook forgotten. There was the haunted pub where every Sunday, the bar stools rearranged themselves into a perfect triangle. The staff pretended not to notice, but one bartender swore he heard them whispering rugby scores. Then the Chopin piano incident. A manor house in Sussex where the piano only played when a thunderstorm struck, and there was Stilton in the pantry. Some historians claim it was just humidity and loose strings. Others argue for what they call fermented dairy influence, which sounds fake, but so do many things in life. Outside you hear the faint sound of hooves, a night delivery cart. The clock ticks in slow rhythm, and somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaks in a way that doesn't match the cadence of your breath. You start to clean up. Featherstone helps, his hands gentle with each slice like he's handling sacred offerings. The brie has become part of the napkin. The Stilton is still dignified. The cheddar, of course, has not changed at all. Cheddar never does. Before you leave, he presses a crumpled flyer into your hand. It's for an upcoming paranormal cheese symposium, scheduled at the Royal Society's Garden Annex. The keynote, Spectral Reactions to Dairy in Confined Spaces. We'll go, he says, if the ghosts approve. You nod. Out on the street, the drizzle has returned. It's softer now, like fog that forgot how to float. You walk slowly, pockets warm with candle-scented air and notebook pages. You're not sure what you learned tonight. Maybe it's that belief doesn't require logic. Or that brie, though noble, is a poor partner in a spiritual standoff. But most of all, you realize something else. These nights, filled with flickering lights and gently absurd rituals, are starting to feel like their own kind of magic. And ghosts or not, you'll be back tomorrow. You're not even surprised anymore when Featherstone greets you at the door with a block of cheese in one hand and a brass compass in the other. Tonight we go commercial, he says, already halfway down the street. Put on your walking boots. You barely have time to question what that means before he's crossing the road with the speed of someone who's either on a mission or trying to beat the evening fog. Probably both. You tug on your coat, check your pockets for your notebook, and follow. Your boots squelch slightly from yesterday's rain, and as you dodge a particularly aggressive puddle, you wonder when your life stopped involving normal evening plans and started involving dairy-fueled paranormal excursions. The city seems quieter tonight, but somehow more alive. The flickering gas lamps cast long shadows that sway with the wind, and the buildings loom above you like curious onlookers. You follow Featherstone through winding alleyways that smell of soot, candle wax, and the unmistakable undertone of damp brick. At one point, you pass a man selling eels from a wheelbarrow who gives you a look as if to say, "Don't ask questions." I won't either. Eventually, you reach a building wedged, quite literally, between a tobacconist and a glove shop. The sign above the door reads in crooked lettering, "The Whispering Wedge, Lodging, Spirits, and Local Dairy." It looks like the kind of place where secrets live in the floorboards and the wallpaper has witnessed more confessions than any priest. The windows are slightly fogged and a faint, bluish glow comes from one of the upper rooms. Inside, the smell hits you first: lavender, old paper, and something unmistakably cheesy. Not offensive exactly. More like aged contentment. The wallpaper peels gently at the corners, like it's shrugging off responsibility, and the floorboards beneath your feet complain with every step. The woman at the front desk doesn't ask for names or payment when Featherstone announces, quite confidently, "We're here about the cheese-based containment field." She simply nods and slides a heavy, tarnished key across the counter without looking up from her needlepoint. Her embroidery appears to depict a ghost holding a wedge of brie. Room 3B is on the second floor. The stairs wheeze with every step, and the hallway carpet looks like it may have been burgundy once. Now it's the color of forgotten memories and spilled tea. A brass plaque on the door says, "Do not open on Wednesdays." It is, of course, Tuesday, which is either perfect or very badly timed. Featherstone wastes no time. He moves through the room like a conductor preparing for an odd, lactose-infused symphony. You help him line the windowsills with neat wedges of red Leicester, then tape a slice of Stilton to the back of a dining chair. "What's this for?" you ask. "Vertical spirit flow," he replies without blinking. You nod slowly, unsure whether to be impressed or deeply concerned. He then arranges a plate of various cheeses at the center of the room like a sacred offering. There's something almost reverent about the way he unwraps the wax paper. It's the kind of focus usually reserved for surgical procedures or assembling furniture without instructions. You sit back on the velvet settee, faded but surprisingly comfortable, and try to make sense of it all. As you wait for paranormal activity, Featherstone begins a lecture. Not in a boring, dusty academic kind of way, but like a man who's discovered a hidden map and just can't wait to show you all the dotted lines. Ghost tourism, he begins, pacing slowly, was a booming industry during the Victorian spiritualist movement. You see, people wanted the thrill of the supernatural, but in a manageable way. Theaters had seances before performances. Inns claimed they were built atop ancient burial sites. But it was never about the danger, it was about the atmosphere. He pauses to adjust a wedge of cheddar like it's a tuning fork. "Too much ghost," he continues, "and you scare away the clientele. Not enough. You're just a dusty old inn. But just the right amount of eerie? That's profit." You glance around the room. A porcelain doll sits on the mantel. You're 80% sure it wasn't there earlier. You decide not to ask. Featherstone points to the wall. "That painting? See the woman in the veil? She's not anyone famous. But guests swear her eyes follow them. That's worth at least $1 per night in added revenue." You're trying to process this when he says, completely seriously, "Some places even employed cheese readers." You blink. What? Cheese readers? Like tea leaf readers but with cheese rinds. Cracks, melts, bubble formations. They believed cheese could reflect spiritual energy and even predict future events. You try to keep your expression neutral. I once met a man, he continues, who swore he could predict the likelihood of marriage proposals based on cheddar melt patterns. He says this with the solemnity of a weather report. You scribble it down. Just then, a soft thud comes from the far corner. You freeze. Another thud, this time from behind the wardrobe. Featherstone doesn't panic. He simply raises the brass compass. It spins once dramatically, then points due east. Residual energy, he says calmly. You open your mouth to ask what that actually means, but the wardrobe door creaks open, and a pair of old boots falls out. Empty boots. No ghost. Just boots. He doesn't flinch. These belong to a railway porter, he says matter-of-factly, who died tragically in a wheelbarrow incident. Very sad. The haunting here is type 3, echo-based, non-interactive. They don't respond. They just repeat. You write it down. So what does the cheese do, you ask? In this case, absorbs the echo. Brie in particular is excellent for muffling auditory residue. You blink. And that's proven? He shrugs. Still debated in scholarly circles. Of course it is. He points out how some rooms, especially those with thick wallpaper and damp plaster, tend to amplify ghost activity. Cheese, being both porous and aromatic, acts as an energetic sink. It soaks up tension. At least that's the theory. He compares it to how a sponge absorbs noise in a music studio. The more he talks, the more you realize something. None of this is designed to prove ghosts are real. It's about creating a space where people can believe they are, and doing it with care, intention, and an oddly scientific devotion to cheese. You're halfway lost in this thought when the innkeeper appears again, holding a box tied with string. A little something for the road, she says warmly. You open it later. 3 small wedges of cheese, aged cheddar, creamy goat, and something suspiciously blue. A ghost story leaflet titled The Whispering Wedge, a tale of curds and courage, and a candle labeled Ectoplasmic Number 7, Blue Cheese Edition. She smiles. Come again if your dreams get weird. Back on the street, the city feels quieter. Even the fog seems gentler. Featherstone walks beside you, arms folded behind his back like a tour guide of forgotten phenomena. Ghost tourism, he says almost wistfully, was one of the era's biggest money makers. Seances, haunted dolls, spirit photographs. But the real MVP? Cheese. Always cheese. The unsung stabilizer of the spectral world. You chuckle. It doesn't seem quite so ridiculous anymore. After all, you've seen stranger things. Like haunted boots. And cheese knives that double as divining rods. But that's for another night. The first thing you notice when you walk into tonight's venue is the banner. Annual Cheese and Spirit Exhibition, Public Hall, Crooked Elm District. It hangs slightly askew over a pair of large oak doors, hand-painted letters curling at the edges like they've been steeped too long in the London fog. The second thing you notice is that someone has sculpted a bust of Queen Victoria entirely out of aged red Leicester. The resemblance is uncanny, if slightly melty. Her nose has begun to sag under the heat of the gas lamps, and someone has placed a tiny paper crown on top that reads, Majesty of Mold. You try not to stare, but it's crumbly. Beside you, Featherstone stands with his arms crossed and a look of absolute reverence. Isn't she majestic? He says, eyes misting ever so slightly. Won 3rd place last year. You're not sure whether he's referring to the bust or the exhibition. Probably both. The hall is large, wooden-floored, and lit by flickering chandeliers that give everything a slight sepia glow, like you've stepped into a memory preserved in cheese wax. It smells like equal parts candle wax and sharp cheddar, with occasional wafts of something blue and noble. The atmosphere is warm. Unreasonably so. Vendors line the perimeter of the room, there stalls a curious blend of rustic charm and scientific ambition. Small handwritten signs advertise wares like ghost-repelling Gruyere, ectoplasm-absorbing Emmental, and astral body-compatible goat cheese. One enthusiastic vendor is passing out pins that say "Got Gouda? Get ghost-free." You pocket one. You don't know why. Tonight, you're here in an official capacity. Featherstone is speaking on a panel. You are his assistant, note-taker, and, if things go south, designated emotional support human. He's already begun mumbling to himself while stroking a wedge of Wensleydale, so things are progressing as expected. The panel is titled, "Dairy as Etheric Conductor, Separating Mold from Myth." As the chairs fill up, you spot a strange cast of characters taking their seats at the long table at the front of the room. The host is a soft-spoken man with pince-nez glasses, who introduces the panelists in a voice that suggests he's narrated many a cheese documentary in his day. First is a spiritualist medium with a cheese wheel tattooed on her forearm. She offers a little bow and whispers, "Horace says hello," to no one in particular. Next is a man in a wool waistcoat who insists his grandfather was haunted by provolone for 15 years. And finally, Featherstone, who is adjusting his spectacles and looking at a triangle of brie like it holds the secrets of the universe. Featherstone's presentation is called "The Cheeseboard as Portal, Investigating Dairy-Generated Spirit Activity Since 1849. He begins with a dramatic flourish, producing a stack of household journals and laying them on the table with a thud. He opens one to a yellowed page and reads aloud a diary entry from 1872. "The child walked again in her sleep, spoke in the voice of an unfamiliar man. A wedge of Roquefort was found beneath her bed. You try not to cough." Featherstone shows a hand-drawn chart next, correlating ghost sightings with dairy fermentation cycles. The lines are jagged. The labels are vague. The whole thing would fall apart under scientific scrutiny, but the audience nods slowly, as if truth lives somewhere in the in-between. "The data may not be precise," he admits with a smile, "but it is consistently vague." You admire the confidence. The medium follows with a story about channeling the spirit of a dairy farmer named Horace who insisted his cows mooed differently in haunted barns. She pauses often for spiritual confirmation. The room is silent, reverent. Someone weeps into their fondue. Next comes the cheese contest portion of the evening. Yes, there's a cheese contest. Participants present blocks of cheese they claim were exposed to haunted environments. The judges, 3 stern women in tweed, examine each one with forks, thermometers, and one slightly bent dowsing rod. A woman in a ruffled cape claims her Stilton played a single piano note when unwrapped. Another insists her cheddar visibly trembled beneath the last full moon. "It's more of a tingling than a vibration," one judge says, scribbling into a leather notebook. "You write that down." Featherstone leans in close. "These events," he whispers, "they're not really about conclusions. They're about continuity, ritual. That strange shared belief that maybe, just maybe, the world is a little bigger, a little weirder than we allow ourselves to believe." He smiles gently. "Even if those secrets are hiding in dairy aisles." You look around. No one here seems confused or ironic. They're here to believe, or at least to participate in a long tradition of pretending together. And there's something surprisingly healing in that. Later, as the evening winds down, a teenage boy nervously approaches the panel with a question. "If I'm lactose intolerant," he says, voice cracking slightly, "does that make me more or less likely to be haunted?" The room considers this. A woman in a shawl steps forward and hands him a tiny wax-sealed cube. "Spirit-neutral butter," she says kindly. "No dairy. No drama. You note that down too." Featherstone wins a ribbon. Most consistent mold structure in a spirit-affected sample. He beams like a child handed a gold star. It's a small, purple rosette with a bit of blue cheese crusted on one edge. He pins it to his lapel with pride. As you exit the hall, the air outside feels cooler, fresher. You breathe it in like tea steam. Featherstone walks beside you, ribbon flapping slightly in the breeze, hands behind his back. "Did you enjoy it?" he asks. You nod. You're exhausted. But it's a good tired. The kind of tired you get when you've spent an evening inside someone else's strange, sincere dream. As you walk home beneath the gaslights, you remember something the panel host said in passing. History is written in ink, but the margins smell faintly of milk. And somehow that feels about right, even if you're not entirely sure what it means. Tonight begins not in Featherstone's study, nor in a haunted cheese shop, nor even in a suspiciously echo-prone guest house, but in a perfectly ordinary basement filled with pickles. You're in Southwark, standing in the back room of an old grocer's shop whose front windows are crowded with sun-bleached ads for treacle, brown paper parcels of flour, and something called digestive tonics that you're pretty sure is just rebranded gin. It's late evening, and the whole street feels hushed in that way only older parts of the city do, like it remembers more than it should. Featherstone is already halfway down a short staircase leading into the grocer's basement when he calls back to you with a cheerful, "Mind your step." The last one has a vendetta against boots. You descend carefully, your boots squelching slightly from the drizzle outside, and find yourself surrounded by shelves stacked high with jars. Big jars, small jars, squat jars with handwritten labels. Some are dusty, some gleam, and many are vaguely sweating. Or maybe that's just the contents. The air smells of vinegar, salt, and a faint undertone of something botanical and unplaceable. Lavender, maybe, or very nervous celery. "Welcome," Featherstone announces grandly, arms outstretched, to one of the most emotionally unstable storage spaces in London. You believe him. Because, frankly, the gherkins are glistening with an intensity that feels personal. He hands you a wax pencil and a soft-covered notebook that smells faintly of horseradish. Ready to document ghost fermentation? You look at him. Long slowly. But by now you've learned that questioning Featherstone too aggressively only encourages him. So you accept the pencil and nod with the solemnity of someone preparing to record supernatural pickling data. He gestures toward a stack of barrels with red-stamped warnings. Pickled onions, 1872. Do not open unless supervised by a clergyman. Cursed in 1894. Still testing. You pause. That last one, they tested it recently? Last August, he replies. A Methodist, I believe. Only his spectacles fogged. We called it a neutral outcome. Tonight's experiment, he explains while unpacking a velvet-lined case of cheese wedges, is about proximity. To determine whether dairy products exhibit altered ectoplasmic behavior when placed near long-fermented non-dairy goods. Or, as Featherstone puts it, we're exploring the theory of spiritual cross-pickling. You are, understandably, full of questions. Did Victorians really believe pickles could affect hauntings? He waves a hand airily. Yes and no. The Victorians didn't trust anything that lasted longer than 2 winters. If it kept too well or too long, it was either a miracle, a sin, or a concern for the local magistrate. He carefully places a wedge of double Gloucester next to a jar of beets, and you begin making notes like you're in a science class taught by a ghost and a deli counter. As he works, he begins his favorite pastime, a lecture. You see, he says, stepping lightly around a crate marked beans, pickled, rebellious. Victorian food culture lived in fear of spoilage. And with good reason. Before refrigeration, your cabbage could kill you. Or your cheese might whisper during thunderstorms. He pauses. Granted, the second one's less documented. But still. You write down, food equals transformation. Transformation equals mystery. Mystery equals ghost magnet. It feels more like philosophy than paranormal science, but it's oddly comforting. You watch as Featherstone pairs Stilton with a jar of pickled eggs. He hums tunelessly while adjusting the alignment, occasionally checking a compass or tapping a brass pendulum that refuses to swing. He tells you about an 1871 case where a woman blamed her migraines and auditory visions on a mislabeled Stilton. Another, he says, involved a widower who swore his late wife refused to pass on until he emptied their entire larder of pickled asparagus. Academic consensus? He offers, deadpan. Still elusive. You try to keep a straight face as you record it all. Somewhere above, the grocer makes a noise like a resigned cough and heads back upstairs. Apparently, he's learned to stop asking questions about your group. Last week, you overheard him muttering, "At least they don't bring goats anymore." The basement is cool and dimly lit, the lamps flickering just slightly, not from supernatural interference, but from age and poor wiring. You feel enclosed but not trapped. More like preserved. The way the air presses close, thick with salt and thyme and the endless patience of aging things, is oddly soothing. There's something reverent in the way Featherstone moves. He isn't mocking or making a show. His hands are careful. His placement's deliberate. To an outsider this would look like nonsense. To you, who has watched him coax silence from haunted chairs and test spiritual reactions to crumb textures, it looks like care. You know, you say, sometimes it feels less like ghost hunting and more like tea ceremony. Featherstone chuckles. Ritual comforts the living. The dead just get caught in the overflow. You ask him if any of this ever works. If ghosts actually show up. If cheese changes things. If pickles hum. He shrugs. Depends what you mean by work. Do ghosts appear and give us feedback surveys? No. But do people sleep better knowing their windowsills are salted and their kitchens arranged in spectral harmony? Absolutely. You find yourself smiling at that. Maybe belief doesn't require a result. Maybe it just needs a shape to fit into. There are no bumps or rattles that night. No cold fingers brushing your neck. The jars don't rattle and the cheese doesn't levitate. There is only the slow sound of vinegar shifting gently in its glass homes, and the distant hum of late-night buses above ground. You finish your notes. Featherstone closes his velvet case. And then, with a theatrical sigh, he says, "Next time we try smoked cheese." Spirits hate the ambiguity. You raise an eyebrow. Because it's neither raw nor cooked? Precisely. As you climb the steps out of the cellar, you pause beside a particularly large jar of gherkins. The pickles inside bob faintly as if nodding to you. You decide not to read into it. The night air is cool and forgiving. Somewhere a carriage rolls past. A cat eyes you suspiciously from the window of a second-story flat. Featherstone is humming again, a little tune you've started to recognize. You think it might be from a hymn, or possibly an old cheese commercial. And for once, you don't feel like you're chasing ghosts or proving anything or solving old mysteries. You feel like you're witnessing something, participating in the care that keeps the world and all its strange corners gently stitched together. Tonight you learn nothing conclusive, but your notes are full, your wax pencil dulled, and your heart oddly warm. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. You weren't expecting to spend your evening in an abandoned greenhouse, but here you are, ankle-deep in cracked terracotta pots, surrounded by vines that look like they gave up halfway through growing. The air smells faintly of damp earth, rust, and something vaguely lemony, like someone tried to ward off mold using citrus soap, in 1893. Featherstone is already knee-deep in ivy and dramatic posture. "Behold," he says with a sweep of his arm, "the site of the 1858 dairy seance." You take a moment to absorb the scene. Dusty glass panes overhead, half shattered and laced with spiderwebs. Soil that crunches slightly underfoot from years of dried leaves and forgotten tools. And in the far left corner, a suspiciously aggressive cucumber plant that seems to be holding a grudge. You nod slowly. Because honestly, by this point in your apprenticeship, nothing surprises you. Not the cheese-related ghost studies, not the haunted hotel toiletries, and certainly not ghost gardening. Featherstone adjusts his scarf, the brown one with a pattern that might be runes or might just be poorly printed badgers, and begins to unroll what looks like an ancient tea-stained blueprint. It's the layout of the greenhouse, marked up with red ink and what might be marmalade. You lean in. High vibration zone. Beetroot seemed uncomfortable here. Mozzarella incident, avoid. These are Lady Philippa's original seance annotations, he explains with reverence. She believed the plant roots could serve as etheric conduits. Organic messaging cables, if you will. Quite avant-garde. You blink. Did she talk to plants? Featherstone shrugs. Only spiritually. Though her tulips were rumored to lean in when she spoke. Especially when she mentioned camembert. You want to ask follow-up questions. Many follow-up questions, but instead, you begin helping him unpack the seance kit from his oversized satchel. It clinks gently with the sounds of wax-sealed jars, bundled herbs, and what you think is a bronze spoon shaped like a goat. Tonight's mission? Recreate Lady Philippa's original dairy seance and see if the emotional residue of the event still lingers. Featherstone calls it etheric archaeology. You call it a very specific type of Tuesday. You begin placing the cheeses in a careful semicircle on a cracked stone table. It's actually more of a weather-worn workbench, but he insists it has ritual potential. Brie goes at true north, soft and slightly trembling like it already knows it's being judged. Roquefort takes the west position, its veins glistening eerily under the lantern light. Cheddar, always the stalwart, sits at the southern edge with quiet dignity. And at the very center, a lone mozzarella ball, round and unassuming, acts as the neutral anchor. Think of it as the peacekeeper, Featherstone says, adjusting its position by exactly half a centimeter. Mozzarella offends no one, not even ghosts. He begins lighting the lanterns, 6 of them arranged in an uneven circle, their light soft and flickering against the misted glass. The greenhouse seems to exhale slightly. A few insects buzz softly in the shadows, and from somewhere in the overgrown corner, there's the sound of a very tired toad. Featherstone clears his throat, opens Lady Philippa's seance logbook, which smells faintly of nutmeg and regret, and begins to hum. You pause. Is that music? He nods solemnly. The old Devon ghost summoning scale. Part sea shanty, part lullaby. Designed to comfort the recently expired. You glance down at your notes and add, atmosphere. 1 part surreal, 2 parts sincere. Featherstone begins reading aloud from the logbook. His voice softens, taking on a rhythmic cadence. We call to the winds. We call to the worms. We call to Aunt Margaret, who never paid back the candlestick debt. You try to keep a straight face. It's not easy. A gust of wind whistles through the broken panes. Somewhere behind you, a bird coughs, an odd rasping sound like it too wasn't expecting a seance tonight. You lean toward Featherstone and whisper, "Do you think it's working?" He considers this, brow furrowed. No one's knocked anything over yet, so maybe. The two of you sit for a while in silence. It's not uncomfortable. More like the kind of silence you get when you've shared something odd with someone who doesn't make it feel so odd anymore. The kind of quiet that makes even a collapsing mozzarella feel purposeful. Featherstone breaks the stillness. Did I ever tell you about the theory that mold carries memory? You shake your head slowly, warily. Some Victorian herbalists believe that mold, particularly the kind found in aged cheese, could absorb emotional states, like grief, or confusion, or even, he adds with a dramatic pause, bureaucratic resentment. You raise an eyebrow. He continues more gently. The science, of course, is non-existent, but the metaphor? Beautiful. Imagine, the cheese remembers, not because it has to, but because someone needed something to. You both glance at the Roquefort. It stares back in that blue-green, knowing way. He closes the logbook. Lady Philippa claimed that during her final seance, the cheese spelled out a message. What did it say? She claimed it spelled rest, though others insisted it said rat. Debate continues. You can't help but laugh, softly, respectfully. The greenhouse doesn't echo. It absorbs the sound, folds it into its corners like an old coat taking on another layer of warmth. The lanterns flicker. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind you they're there. The brie begins to sag noticeably. "It's always the brie," Featherstone mutters. "Too emotional." You begin carefully repacking the cheeses, what's left of them. The mozzarella, still mostly intact, goes back into its wax pouch. The Roquefort is returned to its case with ceremonial caution. The brie has partially merged with the stone surface. You leave it where it lies. A small, soft offering. As you pack away the last of the tools, Featherstone walks to the back of the greenhouse. There, nestled between two toppled flower pots and what may once have been a statue of a duck, is a mossy stone pedestal. He pulls something from his coat pocket, a single cube of aged cheddar, and places it gently at the center. "For any lingering spirits," he says, voice low, "or very determined mice." You follow him out into the night. The cold has settled into the stones, and your boots crunch slightly on gravel that wasn't there when you arrived. The road is quiet, save for the occasional far-off cart or cat or midnight violin from a window somewhere. Halfway down the lane you ask, "Did you feel anything back there?" He thinks for a long moment. "I felt like someone else had sat there before us. Someone sad. Someone curious. Someone who maybe liked brie a bit too much." You smile, tucking your notebook deeper into your coat. You glance back once. The greenhouse stands still, glass bones catching the light, vines swaying gently like a curtain drawn between centuries. Somewhere inside, that little cube of cheddar waits. Maybe for ghosts. Maybe for time. Maybe just for the simple satisfaction of being placed with intention. And in the hush of the street behind you, you realize something. You're not chasing ghosts anymore. You're bearing witness to the places they've lingered, and learning quietly how to sit beside them. It's raining again naturally, but not the dramatic movie montage kind of rain. No thunder, no flashes of lightning peeling open the sky. Just that soft, persistent drizzle that seems less like weather and more like the atmosphere forgot how to stop misting. It clings to your hair, beads gently on your coat, and makes everything, including your socks, feel politely damp. Featherstone, ever the enthusiast for questionable conditions, insists it's the perfect night for spectral interference. You don't argue. You gave up arguing somewhere around the cheese seance in the abandoned greenhouse. Tonight's destination is an old boathouse on the south bank of the Thames, tucked behind a line of warehouses and weeping willows that seem permanently heartbroken. It's the kind of place that doesn't appear on tourist maps, or even most regular ones. You only find it if you know how to listen for the sound of dripping eaves and half-forgotten stories. Featherstone says the place has history. Smugglers, spirit mediums, and one man who, allegedly, attempted to invent a type of cheese that could float. That last experiment ended poorly. And, according to Featherstone, in at least 3 minor hauntings and one persistent smell that never quite washed out of the floorboards. The boathouse itself looks as if it's trying to retreat into the river, leaning slightly left like an old man whose knees gave up sometime in the Edwardian period. Ivy climbs across its slatted sides in chaotic spirals, and the door hangs just crooked enough to squeal like a distressed violin when you open it. Inside, the scent hits you immediately, a blend of river water, ancient timber, and something faintly resembling overripe brie. Not unpleasant exactly, just assertive. Like the air itself is clearing its throat. You hang your lantern on a rusty iron hook and watch the golden glow stretch long shadows across the warped floor. Featherstone, meanwhile, is in his element, setting out tonight's tools with the precision of a magician and the enthusiasm of someone who has absolutely no intention of explaining himself twice. There's a copper bell the size of a teacup, a flask of cold milk, labeled "for contrast" in tidy handwriting, and a cheese board so polished and well-appointed, you quietly suspect he's been hiding a Waitrose delivery budget from you. "Tonight," he says grandly, "we test a lesser-known Victorian theory, that water amplifies spirit energy, especially when dairy is present." You blink. "Like ghost fondue?" Featherstone pauses, considering. "Precisely not," he replies with the grave dignity of a man who has, on at least one occasion, Written, "Do not microwave Stilton" in a research journal. But that's an excellent title for a future paper. You nod slowly, scribbling in your notebook, "Temporal Dairy Bridge?" Then underline it. Twice. He explains that many 19th century spiritualists believed water was a kind of psychic conductor, capable of enhancing emotional frequencies and making the invisible more conversational. That's why seances were often held near rivers, lakes, wells, and, he claims with a wink, the occasional bathtub. Cheese, however, was a wild card. Water is memory, he tells you, carefully aligning a wedge of red luster with the boathouse's window frame. Cheese is preservation. Together they form a sort of emotional circuit, a bridge between then and now. You stare at the cheese board. It looks like an hors d'oeuvre platter for someone about to summon their ancestors. Outside, the rain continues in a rhythm that's more suggestion than storm. Somewhere further down the river, a canal boat honks mournfully, as though it's tired of its own metaphors. Featherstone begins arranging the cheeses along the wooden railing that overlooks the Thames, spacing them precisely, like planets in a celestial dairy constellation. A wheel of Wensleydale, a triangle of Gruyere, a soft round of camembert that immediately begins to glisten under the mist. And as he works, he tells you about the floating cheddar letters of 1864. Apparently, a man named Bartholomew Quince believed he could communicate with the dead by carving questions into blocks of cheddar and letting them drift down the Thames. According to his own journals, the answers would come, not in the form of returning cheese, but in dreams, whispered in curdled metaphor. Historians, Featherstone says dryly, tend to agree he was severely sleep-deprived and possibly eating unregulated mold. You glance at the cheddar in question. Did any of it work? He shrugs. Hard to say. He claimed dreams increased. So did his toothaches. A long pause follows. Not an awkward one. The kind that settles naturally between friends who are comfortable with the quiet. The river murmurs softly below the dock, bumping gently against the stilts. The cheese says nothing, which is probably for the best. Then, delicately like a footstep in a dream, the copper bell rings. You both freeze. The sound isn't loud, but it's clear. One soft chime, like the air had a thought and expressed it politely. You glance at Featherstone. His hands are folded in his lap. He hasn't moved. Then the bell chimes again. What? Then again. A second and third time. The flask of milk, sitting uncapped near the railing, gives a tiny rattle. You wait. Silence returns. Your heart beats louder than you'd like to admit. Featherstone exhales slowly. Could be the wind, he says. Could be the old beam shifting. Could be a poltergeist in need of a snack. You snort, more out of nerves than amusement. Or someone trying to tell us that Wensleydale and water don't mix. He smiles, eyes soft behind his fogged-up spectacles. It's always like this. That moment in between. Maybe yes, maybe no. But never fully closed. And somehow that's more satisfying than a full answer. Because what you're chasing, what you've really been chasing, these strange nights with cheese and shadows and secondhand candlelight, isn't necessarily ghosts. It's that fragile sliver of space between logic and legend. That trembling heartbeat where wonder lives. You help pack up, wrapping the cheeses carefully in wax paper and sliding the copper bell back into its velvet-lined box. Feels like a ritual now. Folding away the strange, the maybe real, and storing it until next time. The rain has grown heavier, though still soft, like the sky is apologizing for being persistent. The cheeses are damp now. They smell braver somehow, as if weathering the mist gave them opinions. Before you leave, Featherstone crouches beside the wooden beam that hangs just above the waterline. He unwraps a small slice of Gruyere and places it gently on the damp wood. Just in case they're shy, he whispers. You don't ask who they are. You don't need to. You step out into the night beneath your umbrella. The kind that leaks just enough to keep you humble. For a while neither of you speaks. just footsteps on wet stone and the rhythmic whisper of rain meeting the river. Then you ask softly, "Do you think the river remembers us?" Featherstone tilts his head thoughtfully. "I think it remembers everything," he says at last. "It's just not great at storytelling." You both chuckle. Not because it's funny, but because it feels like the kind of thing that could be true. And later that night, long after the lantern is out, after your coat is hung up to dry, and after the last crumb of Wensleydale has been forgotten in a jacket pocket, the tide rises just an inch higher than expected. No cause is listed in the official records. But if you were to ask Featherstone, he'd probably say it was gratitude. Or possibly indigestion. Either way, you sleep well that night. And dream of something bobbing softly down the river, carrying a quiet question carved into cheddar. By now you've learned to stop asking what's next. You've followed Featherstone into haunted ghost houses, mysterious greenhouses, and once, memorably, a basement full of aggressively judgmental pickles. But tonight is stranger still. Because tonight you're going to a library. Not just any library either. You're headed to a private archive hidden inside the townhouse of the Honorable Miss Theodora Amblesham, an octogenarian scholar whose life's work, according to Featherstone, is the painstaking documentation of every known instance of ghost-related food phenomena in the British Isles. Featherstone adjusts his waistcoat as you approach her front door. It's the sort of gesture he makes when he's trying to impress someone. Or brace himself. Maybe both. "She's eccentric," he says, smoothing his sleeves. "But precise. The kind of woman who labels her tea tins in Latin and files her dreams alphabetically." The townhouse is quiet. A little too quiet. You half expect the door knocker to bite you, but instead the door creaks open to reveal a butler who appears to speak exclusively in sighs. He gestures you in with a barely perceptible tilt of the head and leads you down a hallway lined with portraits of extremely suspicious-looking cats. You're brought into a drawing room that smells faintly of nutmeg and library dust. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. Miss Theodora Amblesham sits in an armchair beneath a chandelier composed entirely of antique forks. She peers over the rim of a large ledger, her expression unreadable behind a pair of round, green-tinted spectacles. A lace doily sits primly on her shoulder. It may or may not be sentient. "So," she says, her voice as dry as well-aged cheddar, "the apprentice." You nod politely, resisting the urge to stand at attention. She gestures for you to sit. You do, perching gingerly on a velvet settee beside a table that holds what appears to be an enormous wheel of Stilton. It sits beneath a bell jar like a holy relic. The lace underneath it has yellowed slightly at the edges, either from age or supernatural leakage. "This," Miss Amblesham says dramatically, "is the Stilton of Sorrows. Documented in no fewer than 15 hauntings, 2 cases of spontaneous weeping, and 3 very unfortunate picnics." Featherstone bows his head with a reverence you suspect is only half mocking. You attempt a respectful expression. It turns out looking solemn about haunted cheese is harder than it sounds. She rises with surprising grace for someone her age and sweeps over to the far wall, where a set of sliding ladders leads up to bookshelves that stretch toward a ceiling painted like a foggy sky. The room hums faintly with the sound of pages remembering. "Welcome," she says, "to the Culinary Apparition Archive." The shelves are packed to bursting. Leather-bound journals with hand-painted spines. Newspaper clippings pinned beneath ribbons. Old menus annotated with notes like "Table 4, butter turned aggressive," and "Avoid the apricot tart." Again. You trail behind her as she moves deftly through the collection. She opens a small velvet box and shows you what she claims is the ghost of a lemon tart. You don't see anything, but the air smells faintly of citrus and something wistful. Then comes the file labeled "The Cheddar That Cried." She opens it delicately. In 1889, she explains, a grocer in Devon reported that one of his cheddars began to weep during full moons. And not metaphorically, she says. It actually leaked. Another case file details a red Leicester that let out a blood-curdling scream one autumn morning in 1902. The incident forced the closure of a cheese shop for an entire week. Investigation later revealed a very trapped, very vocal tabby cat. Probably, she adds, though she doesn't sound entirely convinced. You ask hesitantly, did people really believe these things? She doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she pours herself a cup of tea from a pot decorated with illustrations of mournful radishes. Some did, she finally replies. But more importantly, they wanted to believe. The Victorians collected the uncanny like stamps. And food, especially food that lingered or transformed, blurred the line between comfort and decay. She hands you a small, crinkled pamphlet titled How to Host a Ghostly Banquet Without Offending the Dead. It includes tips such as, and never serve ghost milk with unblessed bread. Always offer blue cheese last. Spirits dislike abrupt openings. They avoid chutney. Just avoid it. You tuck the pamphlet reverently into your notebook. You suspect it will be more useful than some of your undergraduate textbooks. Featherstone, now relaxed and swirling tea like a fortune teller, asks about a lesser-known case, the Whispering Rind of York. Miss Amblesham's eyebrows rise. Ah, yes. The Gouda that murmured secrets. Still unconfirmed, I'm afraid. She retrieves a brittle page from a folio and shows you an illustration. A wheel of cheese cracked down the middle with lines radiating outward like a nervous spiderweb. The rind patterns suggest mild resentment, she says. You nod gravely, unsure how one distinguishes mild resentment from strong in dairy. Academic consensus, she continues, is elusive. Some believe these stories are metaphors, ways of processing grief, class anxiety, spiritual unease. Others believe they're exactly what they sound like. You both glance toward the Stilton of Sorrows. It sits there quietly as if listening. Before you leave, Miss Amblesham hands you a small handwritten card labeled cheeses with high residual emotional charge. It reads, Double Gloucester, lingering regret. Stilton, ancestral grief. Brie, repressed longing. Red Leicester, existential doubt. Goat cheese, unexpected optimism. You run your finger over the card's ridged edge. The ink is slightly smudged as if it was written in a hurry or in emotion. As the butler sighs you toward the exit, you glance back once more at Miss Amblesham. She has returned to her ledger, pen moving slowly across the page. A small plate of crackers sits untouched beside her. You step outside. The mist has grown heavier, turning street lamps into distant moons. Featherstone walks beside you in comfortable silence, his coat buttoned all the way up, his spectacles catching beads of drizzle. It takes a full block before he says, People laugh at us sometimes. You nod. You've seen it? The way people smile when you mention hauntings and cheddar in the same sentence. But I think, he continues, voice quieter now, they'd laugh less if they remembered how often history is shaped by the things we don't understand. You pull the card from your coat pocket, read it again. Brie, repressed longing. You're not entirely sure what that means. But you know it means something. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's always been the point. Emotional cheese won't appear in textbooks. But to someone, somewhere, it mattered enough to record. To name. To preserve. And in the misty hush of this peculiar evening, that feels like enough. You begin to suspect that Featherstone owns a pocket watch for every possible mood. Tonight's has a cracked porcelain face and ticks with a sort of apologetic tone, like it's sorry to be keeping track of time. You're meeting outside a bakery that hasn't been open since 1892, though according to Featherstone, it still smells like cinnamon rolls on Thursdays. It's Monday, unfortunately. The only smell tonight is damp brick and distant drizzle. Featherstone stands beneath the crooked gas lamp, his coat buttoned high and his scarf fluttering slightly in the breeze. When he sees you, he gives a nod that feels unnecessarily solemn, as if you're about to attend a séance conducted by a scone. He produces a rusty key from his pocket, attached to a cheese-shaped keychain that squelches faintly when squeezed. You pretend not to notice. He unlocks a side door with a soft, practiced motion. Inside, the air is thick with dust and something else, something oddly dairy. You take one cautious step in and whisper, "Is that gorgonzola?" Featherstone inhales, then smiles with what might actually be reverence. "This place," he whispers, "was once the epicenter of what spiritualists called emotional baking." You blink. "Is that a real term?" He nods. In the 1870s, there was a belief that strong emotions could affect the structure of baked goods. Joy made sponge lighter. Grief gave density to pound cake. And cheese, well, cheese calmed the dough. Created spiritual balance. Absorbed unfinished thoughts. You have absolutely no idea what to write in your notebook, so you just doodle a bun with little arms hugging a wedge of camembert. He leads you into what used to be the back kitchen. The tile floor is cracked in places, and the old iron ovens look like they might come alive if insulted. Yet someone has clearly swept the space recently. Featherstone notices your gaze and says, "Miss Amblesham sends her apprentice here once a month, to make sure the energies remain edible." On the wide wooden work table, faded with age and speckled with flower ghosts, lies an open ledger. It's spattered with grease, tea stains, and something suspiciously yellow. One page is marked with a little ribbon and in looping old-fashioned script reads, "Tuesday, 2 batches of buttered sole bread, 1 brie circle for Mrs. Halford's piano ghost." Mrs. Halford, Featherstone says with a small smile, claimed her piano only stopped sobbing when she left soft ripened cheese on the windowsill. You raise an eyebrow. "It's the earliest known case of dairy-based musical intervention," he adds proudly. You underline the phrase, "musical intervention," twice and draw a treble clef wrapped around a cheese wedge. Featherstone sets down his bag with a theatrical flourish. Inside is a cloth bundle, neatly folded and tied with what looks suspiciously like twine made of licorice. He unwraps it to reveal a tray of warm scones, a small bowl of clotted cream, and 3 cheeses, Brie, Stilton, and something pale and lemon-scented that you strongly suspect is just soap shaped like a fancy dairy product. "Tonight's experiment," he says, "is a traditional Victorian calming spread. Used during harvest moons, post-funeral teas, and, on one memorable occasion, after a failed elopement involving a stable hand and a very nervous horse." You help him arrange the food around the room. The cheeses go in the 4 corners, forming what he calls the dairy square of safety. The cream is placed in the center on an upturned tin measuring cup. A single beeswax candle is lit and set beside it. Then you wait. At first it's quiet. Too quiet. Then still quiet, but with undertones of creaking pipes and a faint smell of old raisins. The temperature drops just slightly, not enough to shiver but enough to notice. The bowl of cream trembles as if it had a secret it was unsure about sharing. You glance at Featherstone. He offers no answer, just tilts his head and closes his eyes, like he's listening to a particularly difficult symphony composed by biscuits. Then comes the softest clink. Metal on metal. You both turn toward the far counter, where an old teaspoon rocks gently beside a rusted stand mixer. No wind. No vibration. Just one small spoon deciding to have a moment. Featherstone approaches it slowly, crouches and peers underneath. "Could be floorboards," he murmurs. Or, you lean in. Or, the kitchen spirit of 1887. Allegedly fond of raspberry jam and deeply suspicious of rhubarb. You both watch the spoon settle. "Most hauntings in bakeries weren't dramatic," he continues softly. "They were melancholic. Dowie. Spirits who missed breakfast, who lingered for the scent of yeast and the promise of butter." He tells you of a baker in Birmingham who claimed her buns wouldn't rise when she was sad. So she began baking with emotion-specific ingredients. Rosewater for sorrow, nutmeg for bravery, grated cheddar for unresolved feelings. No firm conclusions, he admits. But the buns were delicious. You end the night seated on 2 wooden flour crates, sharing a warm scone that may or may not have absorbed some whisper of ghost. Featherstone pours you tea from a thermos. The napkin he hands you is embroidered with the phrase, "Proofing isn't just for dough." You smile because of course it is. Outside, the rain has stopped, and the street lamp flickers like it's blinking at you slowly. The city hums. The oven groans faintly as it cools into memory. And somewhere in that quiet, amidst cream and crumbs and kindly nonsense, you feel like part of something that doesn't need to be understood to be real. Maybe it's the ghost. Maybe it's the cheese. Maybe it's just what happens when stories are baked into the walls and someone remembers to light the candle again. By now, you've accepted that Featherstone owns at least one haunted umbrella. Possibly two. Tonight's umbrella is the gray one with a carved wooden handle shaped like a lion's paw and a slight rustling sound that has never been fully explained. It creaks when it opens, not mechanically but like an old book being woken up. The fabric smells faintly of camphor and burnt toast, and it has an uncanny knack for adjusting its tilt just before a low branch might hit your face. You suspect it's alive, or at least mildly aware. Probably has opinions about the weather. It's drizzling again, the kind of light rain that feels like walking through a sigh. Your coat is already damp around the cuffs, and your boots make soft, apologetic squelches on the gravel. But Featherstone looks entirely at home, striding ahead with purpose, umbrella angled like a ceremonial staff. "We're going to a cemetery," he says cheerfully. "But not for anything morbid. Just an observation walk. Tonight is about silence. And cheddar." You blink at the back of his coat, which has picked up at least 3 leaves and a bit of mystery lint. "Of course it is," you murmur. The cemetery gate is wrought iron, old and bowed, and opens with a whimper. Beyond it, winding paths snake between leaning headstones and moss-covered angels. The trees here grow thick and low, their branches curling like sleepy arms. Everything feels softened by moss and time. Even the shadows seem padded. You walk quietly. It feels like the kind of place where footsteps should come with subtitles. Soft footfall. Featherstone stops in front of a modest grave tucked between 2 weather-worn statues, a lamb and a weeping willow carved from stone. The headstone reads, "Here lies Thomas Whitley, 1809 to 1867. A quiet man with no known allergies." There's a parcel on the stone. Small, neatly wrapped in wax paper and twine, like a gift left behind by someone who still remembers. Featherstone leans in and inhales. "Red Leicester," he says almost reverently. "Someone's been here recently." You squint at the waxy corner peeking out from the wrapping. "Are you saying people leave cheese at graves?" He nods. In the Midlands especially, it was believed that cheese could carry memory, or taste memory technically. The idea was that the dead, if they lingered, could absorb flavors as a form of emotional tethering. Not quite feeding. More like seasoning the afterlife. You stare at the little parcel for a long moment. It seems both odd and gentle. "That's strangely beautiful." "It is," he agrees softly. You continue deeper into the cemetery, your boots crunching over the occasional acorn or fallen petal. It doesn't feel eerie, just quiet, like walking through someone's collection of goodbyes. Featherstone tells you stories in that familiar low tone of his. About morning pastries baked with rosewater and cheese, about widows who tucked bits of bread under their pillows to dream of lost loves. About how some believe children should eat sweetened goat cheese after a funeral to soften the sadness. Some of the tales are barely plausible. One family, he says, was haunted every spring by the sound of their grandmother's knitting needles, until they found a wheel of Stilton buried in her old herb garden. Once they gave it a proper burial, complete with rosemary and a fond speech, the sound stopped. Historians still debate whether it was symbolic, he adds, or just a very intense cheese. You smile. By now you've learned that with Featherstone, the line between folklore and fact is more of a polite suggestion. Eventually you reach a willow tree with a slight lean to it, like it's trying to eavesdrop on the earth. Several smooth stones are stacked at its base, deliberate, balanced, and quietly hopeful. A kind of soft ritual. Featherstone kneels and places a thin sliver of cheddar between two of the stones. His hand lingers there a moment longer than needed, and he whispers something too soft for you to hear. For clarity, he says, straightening. You're about to ask what that means when the wind shifts. It's not dramatic, not cinematic, just a cool flutter like a sigh through lace. Somewhere above, a raven croaks once, then falls quiet. No movement. Just the stillness of old trees holding their breath. And for a second you feel it too. Not a presence exactly. Not a ghostly tap or spectral chill. But a kind of gentle awareness. Like being noticed from the corner of someone's memory. Like the air itself is watching, not to frighten you but to be seen. Featherstone doesn't speak for a while. You both stand under the willow, listening to the leaves rustle like distant conversation. Then softly, the Victorians lived close to death. Not morbidly. Practically. They understood it as a companion to life, not an interruption. Food helped shape that relationship, gave grief a ritual, a texture, a taste. Something you could pass around at a table. You nod. That makes sense. Grief is heavy, but shared grief is portioned. You think of warm kitchens, of half-finished cups of tea, of the comfort in small absurdities, like cheese offerings on a grave. He lights a beeswax candle and places it beside the cheddar. The flame flickers, then settles. The stone seems to accept it. There's no thunderclap. No ghostly voice. Just a steady golden glow against the moss. You're not here to summon anything. Just to acknowledge. On the walk back through the softly misting cemetery, Featherstone shares a lesser-known anecdote, tucked away in some half-forgotten diary he once unearthed in a church attic. Queen Victoria, he begins, once received a spiritual cheese wheel from a Scottish medium. Aged, smoked, and supposedly infused with the affections of her late husband. You look over, raising an eyebrow. Infused? He shrugs. Emotionally, or possibly aromatically. Accounts differ. She accepted it? She never acknowledged it publicly, he says. But palace records show the cheese remained in her private pantry until her death. Some say it was never eaten. Others say it was replaced every year quietly. As if grief could be honored by preservation. You don't answer for a moment. Then, do you think it worked? Featherstone's umbrella sighs a little in the wind. He glances sideways, a rare seriousness softening the crinkle around his eyes. I think grief takes many shapes, he says. And some of them melt. You walk in silence for a few streets more, past flickering gas lamps and the gentle hush of the world settling into night. You think about all the places you've been since the strange journey began. Cheese-haunted boathouses, ghost-seeking greenhouses, libraries full of culinary sorrow. You think about how grief, memory, and food have become strange companions in the shadows. But more than anything, you think about how comforting it is to carry stories like this. Not grand ones. Not famous ones. Just the kind of stories that make grief a little less silent. As you turn the corner toward Featherstone Street, the umbrella tilts slightly again, preemptively avoiding a low branch you hadn't even seen. You pat it, grateful. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the candlelight. Or maybe it's just walking through the forgotten parts of the world with someone who doesn't think they're silly. But tonight you feel quietly brave. Like someone who knows it's okay to leave cheese for the dead. Tonight's destination is neither graveyard nor greenhouse. It's a pub. But not just any pub. This one's called the Mournful Ferret, and according to Featherstone, it hasn't changed its wallpaper since 1854. You step inside and are instantly hit with that warm pub smell. Beer, old wood, the faintest tang of cheddar baked into every brick. A fireplace crackles at the far end and a chalkboard reads, "Tonight's special, ghost ale and cheese platter, ask for mild haunt." Featherstone orders for both of you without looking at the menu. "This place," he whispers as you settle into a booth, is one of the last surviving, spectral taverns in London. You raise an eyebrow. In the late Victorian era, he explains, some pubs leaned into the ghost craze, not with seances or table rapping but with ambience. Just enough strangeness to keep the regulars entertained and the stories flowing. The bartender, an elderly woman with a cardigan full of ghost-themed pins, brings over your drinks and a board of crackers and aged cheeses. She gives you a wink. If the chair moves, don't panic. It's just Cyril. Featherstone waves politely to the air. You do the same just in case. As you nibble a slice of red Leicester, Featherstone tells you about communal haunting theory, how certain places, especially pubs, could absorb layers of emotional residue from their patrons. Joy, sorrow, secrets, and cheese, ever present in pub fare, was believed to anchor those emotions. Old taverns like this, he says, were full of rituals, silent toasts to dead friends, favorite stools that no one else dared sit on, cheese wheels that were never cut because they'd belonged to someone still finishing their drink. You look around. Sure enough, there's a table near the hearth with a dusty cheese wheel on it and a pint that never gets cleared. Featherstone leans in. The Victorians didn't just believe in ghosts. They believed in manners for ghosts. He shows you a small, tattered booklet from his coat pocket. The Proper Conduct of Spirits in Public Houses, 1871 edition. It includes rules such as, do not clink glasses with invisible companions, and never offer cheese without confirming its expiration status. Spirits must not interrupt darts. You both burst out laughing. As the fire crackles and the wind gently taps at the windows, a low creak sounds behind you. Your chair shifts just a little. You freeze. Featherstone doesn't even turn around. Cyril doesn't like Stilton, he says. Slide it toward the hearth. You do as instructed. The chair settles. Featherstone lifts his pint. To cohabitation. You clink glasses gently, trying not to disturb any other invisible patrons. Later that evening, the bartender tells you that every year, regulars leave wedges of cheese on the bar for friends who've passed, just in case they're thirsty and peckish. You find that far more moving than any seance. As you leave, Featherstone jots something in his notebook. Emotional etiquette equals key to spectral stability in shared spaces. Then he turns to you and says, I hope you're keeping track. This one's going in the guidebook. You smile. Somewhere between the red Leicester and the second pint, you stop trying to explain any of this. You just accepted that even ghosts might enjoy pub snacks. Tonight you're on a train. Not a sleek, modern one with whisper-quiet breaks and curated ambient playlists. No, this is a proper steam locomotive, wood-paneled, brass-handled, and rumbling along the rails with the sort of arthritic charm that makes you suspect it's seen more than its fair share of ghosts. Featherstone naturally is delighted. This, he declares, is an historically authentic spectral dairy experiment in motion. You're the only two passengers in the compartment, unless you count the cheese. You glance down at the small wicker picnic basket resting beneath the seat. Nestled inside, a wedge of Wensleydale, a flask of warm milk, and an index card labeled in tidy black ink, Mobile Dairy Resonance Test Number 7. Featherstone is practically vibrating with anticipation. Victorians were obsessed with trains and ghosts, he says, adjusting his cravat. And for a brief, magnificent moment in the 1870s, they believed that both could travel more effectively with cheese. You raise an eyebrow. He flips open his weathered leather notebook with a flourish and begins reading dramatically from a faded page. Now available, spirit transport boxes, lined with brie for spiritual cushioning during rail journeys. You stare at him. You made that up. I absolutely did not. He beams. It's from a pamphlet I found in a barn outside Norwich, The Gentle Person's Guide to Paranormal Luggage. Utterly obscure. Utterly brilliant. Outside the train window, the countryside rolls by in shades of silvery green. The fields are wet with recent rain, and the low stone fences seem to lean into the moonlight like sleepy sheepdogs. Inside, the compartment sways gently, lit by a single overhead lamp that buzzes every time the train hits a bump. Featherstone begins arranging the cheese slices on the windowsill with the precision of someone preparing an offering to a mild-mannered god. This is to test for movement-induced emotional shifts, he says. Victorian mediums believed cheese could stabilize a ghost's energy mid-journey, like a seatbelt for the soul. You hum, jotting notes in your own journal. What cheese for melancholy spirits? Camembert. Restless. Hard cheddar. And lactose-intolerant ghosts? He doesn't miss a beat. Okay, obviously. You both laugh. The train clatters along the rails like a weary mechanical dog. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots. You get the sense the world has narrowed to this one small, ridiculous, wonderful compartment. Featherstone watches the cheese for any changes. Back then, he murmurs, they really believed you could comfort a ghost in transit. Keep it from getting lost. He says it so gently, so matter-of-factly, that it takes you a moment to realize he's not entirely joking. The Wensleydale sits obediently in place, square and unbothered. The camembert, meanwhile, seems to be sulking, a tiny crack forming in its rind. Emotional tension, Featherstone whispers, inspecting it like a jeweler. Very promising. Then the train enters a tunnel. The shift is subtle but immediate. The air tightens. The light above flickers. The silence inside the compartment sharpens, like a breath held too long. You both freeze. A single drop of warm milk slips down the neck of the flask. The travel seance candle, which of course Featherstone brought, flickers sideways and shudders back. You glance at him. Did something just board? Featherstone tilts his head, listening. His expression is curious, not alarmed. Possibly. Or it could be indigestion. I had 2 servings of trifle earlier. He smiles faintly. But yes, I think we're being watched. You look around. Nothing has moved. Nothing looks unusual. And yet, the air feels briefly crowded, like someone just stepped in and hasn't decided whether to say hello. You and Featherstone sit in perfect stillness. The candle regains its posture. The milk stills. You glance back at the cheese. The camembert's crack has deepened ever so slightly, like it's reacting to something unspoken. Very sensitive rind, Featherstone murmurs. Ideal for emotional imprinting. You want to laugh again, but the reverence in his tone stops you. Not because it's overly serious, but because it's sincere. Featherstone never mocks the idea of presence, only marvels at it. The train emerges from the tunnel. Moonlight floods the compartment once more, and with it, a slow exhale. Whatever may have joined you seems to slip away, politely, without fuss, like someone leaving a quiet room mid-conversation. Featherstone reaches into the basket, pulls out a Gouda slice and a biscuit, and hands them to you. For grounding. You accept. The biscuit is just slightly stale, the Gouda smooth and familiar. You eat slowly, letting the soft absurdity of the moment settle in your chest like warm tea. There's something about Featherstone that you envy, his ability to be completely unself-conscious in the face of the strange. He doesn't try to justify what he's doing, or convince you of its importance. He simply believes there's value in witnessing, even if no one else sees it. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what all this cheese and candlelight and train whispering nonsense is about. The human need to hold on to something that's slipping. To memorialize a presence that may already be gone. To pretend, just for a while, that everything important leaves behind a shape we can still sit beside. Featherstone scribbles his final note in the journal. Mobile hauntings respond best to soft cheese. You both start packing up. The flask is nearly empty. The camembert has deflated a little, gently, like an emotion that decided it didn't need to be loud to be felt. He glances out the window, watching the scenery drift by like old dreams. You know, he says after a while, I don't think ghosts really care if we believe in them. You tilt your head. No. He smiles. I think they just want us to act like they're still part of the story. The train begins to slow. The brakes let out a long, sleepy sigh. Outside, the station waits, dark, quiet, empty. Inside, the compartment feels oddly cozy, as if warmed by a conversation no one else heard. You lift the basket, tuck the candle back into its little tin, and step into the aisle. The air smells faintly of steam, cheese, and memory. As you follow Featherstone onto the platform, you find yourself turning back just once to look at the empty compartment. Not because you left anything behind, just in case someone else didn't. Tonight, you find yourself in an unassuming Victorian-era tea room tucked away in a quiet London alley. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it, or unless Featherstone insisted it was where your next spectral culinary encounter awaited. The windows are fogged with condensation, the gas lamps outside casting a golden glow through the mist. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea mingling with something richer. Aged cheddar, maybe, or Stilton softened by time and intention. It's an odd pairing, but somehow it works. Comfort layered upon comfort. Featherstone is already there when you arrive, seated at a corner table beneath an ornate mirror that might, if you squint, be harboring a slight echo of someone else's reflection. He rises to greet you with a glint of anticipation in his eyes, brushing biscuit crumbs from his lapel. "Welcome," he murmurs, "to the final piece of the puzzle." The proprietor is a woman in her 70s, dressed in a lavender shawl and surrounded by the scent of bergamot. She moves like a page turning gently, and when she speaks, her voice is a blend of memory and steam. She's been collecting ghost stories linked to food for decades, she tells you, specifically those tied to tea and dairy. Her teacups, she claims, have absorbed more whispered confessions than most seance tables. She slides a delicate china plate across the lace-covered table. On it, a small assortment of cheeses, each one paired with a particular tea leaf. Brie with Earl Grey, Stilton with Darjeeling. A sliver of red Leicester beside a smoky Lapsang Sochong. This, Featherstone whispers, eyes shining, is the test. How tea and cheese together might soothe or stir spectral energies. You begin with the brie. It's creamy and soft, melting almost instantly on your tongue. The Earl Grey follows, fragrant and slightly bitter. The flavors clash for half a second, then balance. And with that balance, the entire room seems to shift. The ticking of the clock in the corner grows melodic, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. The gaslights hum a little deeper. The proprietor pours more tea and begins telling stories. Victorian guests who paired camembert with green tea to dream of lost children. Widows who found that a spoon of blue cheese stirred into black tea could calm the sound of weeping in their halls. A man who once swore he saw his late wife's reflection blink at him in the teapot's curve, after a particularly strong infusion of oolong. Featherstone listens with reverence, occasionally scribbling notes in the margins of an already overflowing notebook. He adds that some Victorian spiritualists believed the tannins in tea could bind restless spirits, tether them gently, keep them from drifting. The cheese, in turn, provided an anchor. Fat and salt. Warmth. Memory. Together, tea and cheese became a kind of spiritual lullaby. You sip the Darjeeling. It tastes like late afternoon sun and dusty libraries. Paired with the Stilton, it becomes something deeper. Earthy. Rooted. The kind of flavor that makes you feel like you've been somewhere before, even if you haven't. You realize this delicate ritual might have been more than superstition. It was grief management. It was hope disguised as hospitality. A way to reach into the unknown with nothing more than porcelain and patience. As the evening wanes, the room grows quieter. Not heavy but soft. Muffled like snow. You and Featherstone share a final cup of tea, Lapsang rich and smoky, paired with the red Leicester's tang. The combination leaves a warmth in your chest that doesn't fade with the cooling cup. Outside, the alley is still cloaked in fog. The city seems distant. Time folds. Inside, the warmth lingers. You feel somehow connected. Not just to the ghosts or the guests of centuries past, but to the very act of seeking comfort. The very human impulse to find meaning in softness, in warmth and shared silence. As your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by tannins and gentle ritual, you think, maybe ghosts aren't so different from us after all. Maybe they just want to be remembered. Maybe they, too, are looking for one last cup of tea before the night ends. Now, as you settle deeper into your bed, the world outside fades softly away. The hum of the day slows to a gentle whisper, like a lullaby sung by time itself. Imagine the warm scent of aged cheese mingling with the cool night air, the quiet flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows that dance just beyond sight. Your breath eases into a slow rhythm, each inhale carrying you further from the bustle and into calm. The stories you've heard tonight settle like a comforting blanket, wrapping around your mind, inviting you to rest. Sleep is no longer a distant promise but a gentle companion, guiding you softly into dreams where history and mystery blend into one peaceful place. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with quiet wonders.